All right, we're gonna do a really interesting one on voter ID laws. And what you're gonna learn is that voter registration is really different than what it takes to vote at a polling place. As a general strategy, Democrats are into voter registration. They're putting millions of dollars into statewide voter registration campaigns. And the media is saying that Trump has little power to actually make drastic changes to how voting works. This is only half true, but there is some truth to it. And that's because in the Constitution, we have this elections clause. And basically what this says is that the state gets to decide how they're going to run their elections and register voters, but that Congress can change or regulate this at any time. But this is only for federal elections. Because as an example, just until recently, non-citizens could vote in Washington, D.C.'s local elections because it's not a federal election. Similarly, federal law lays out that you're going to have these elections on even numbered years. But Virginia does their gubernatorial governor elections in off years. So they have a different way of running the gubernatorial election than they do the presidential election. So this is going to be really important because all this stuff about how elections work in the Constitution basically only applies to federal elections. And you're going to see that's important. So when Trump does this executive order talking basically about voter ID laws, where he says that here we rely on self-attestation for citizenship, meaning we don't force people to prove they are citizens to register to vote. Again, in federal elections, but this goes back to this National Voter Registration Act that was passed in 1993. It was designed to promote voter registration. So when you see voter ID laws, it's actually kind of a squishy and unhelpful term because does that mean to register or voter ID to show when you actually go to the polling place? And this is going to come back too. So there was this case in 2018 where the Kansas Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, here's this dude right here, promoted as Kansas's Secretary of State, which is the office that runs elections, a statewide voter ID law, but a federal judge found it unconstitutional. This is the judge here, Julie Robinson. She basically said, you've got this elections clause. The Congress passed this NVRA, and requiring voter ID, Chris Kobach, is unconstitutional. It creates an unnecessary burden on voters. Importantly, Judge Robinson was appointed by a Republican, George Bush. And what she says is true. The NVRA was designed to promote voter registration. So how does it promote that? Well, first of all, it requires states to basically offer voter registration every single time somebody applies for a driver's license. But most importantly, it creates this standardized federal voter registration application. And it says that when states send in that voter registration application, they can only require the person sending it in to identify information that includes a statement of eligibility. So states cannot require a formal authentication, i.e. ID, for someone to fill out this form. If somebody fills out this form properly and says, I deserve to vote, then the state must register them for federal elections. The idea here being that if the person does that and it's not correct, then they are subject to penalties of perjury. But it shows you that there's a possibility that you could have voters who are only registered to vote in federal elections and not registered to vote in statewide elections. And this actually happens in Arizona. So currently, there are about 50,000 people registered in Arizona to only vote in federal elections, and 36,500 of them have never shown proof of citizenship. Arizona did not like this. The voters in Arizona passed a requirement that voters prove their citizenship to register. But again, the Supreme Court ruled against that. They found that Congress has the right to set the rules, and that they did with this National Voter Registration Act. So that's why what Trump is pushing is this Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the SAVE Act. And what it would do is require documentary proof of citizenship in person to register to vote in federal elections. And driver's licenses, military, tribal IDs, they would not satisfy that requirement because you can have a driver's license as a non-citizen. So basically, it's a birth certificate or a passport. And importantly, almost 70 million American women, their birth certificate does not match their legal name because they changed it when they got married. So being real about it, I'm actually wondering if this is the best way to approach this but clearly the public supports having photo ID to vote. But I think that the public really wants it to be associated with showing your photo ID in order to cast a ballot. So at the polling place, 80% of people support that. And Monmouth University is not like some Republican outfit. Interestingly, it looks like a lot of Democrat-run states go against what the public wants, because here you see that in only these blue states are the ones where you have to show photo ID to vote. California, no photo ID at all, no ID required. Almost all of New England, no ID required. And in places like Minnesota, you actually can go to a polling place and vouch for people without any ID, and they can vote same day. So like I can go with John and say, I vouch for John, he lives in the area, he should be able to vote as a resident of this area, and Minnesota will let John vote same day. And the way that they're thinking is that here is what happens after a vote is cast, is that local election officials will basically audit the votes that were cast in that area. But honestly, that's a lot to put on a local election official to find out whether or not John is in fact a resident. And I don't see a lot of evidence that that is an extremely rigorous process. And furthermore, it's thwarted by the fact that a lot of these Democrat-aligned states and municipalities have what they call either sanctuary or welcoming laws. For example, here's the village of Oak Park right near Chicago. They call themselves a welcoming village. So they don't collect a lot of data on immigration status. They actually say collect the least data possible. And similarly, Illinois has this thing called the Trust Act that is enacted at the state level that's very similar. Boston has a similar law. Many of these sanctuary cities exactly do this, in that they do not collect data from people, and they certainly do not allow their data to go into federal databases like taxpayer databases or death registries to check to see if, in fact, the person who voted aligns with their local data, because they are legally prohibited from doing that because of the sanctuary or welcoming laws. So what I'm seeing here is that even if these guys got these voter ID laws and the SAVE Act passed, it would make an impact, but only on federal elections, not on governor's races or anything else that happens at the state level. Because clearly, like Washington, D.C. was allowing non-citizens to vote in its elections. They can do that. So what do you think? Voter ID laws, should we have them, or are they bad for democracy?